Okay, let's see if I have enough storage to do this reading. I'm doing it in my son's room with his Christmas lights, which are cheerful. And I'm a little bit down today, or quite down. Just like all this stuff is coming up, and it can be confusing, but it also mostly is just painful, the human stuff, the human feelings of separation and all of that stuff that's not true, but it takes practice to recognize it's not true, I guess. Okay, so Where the Crawdads Sing by Julia Owens. Shh. Hush, y'all, Ariel cried out. We never laugh. You hear me? We never laugh at each other. Y'all know better than that. Kaya sat down fast in her seat at the back of the room, trying to disappear like a bark beetle, blending into the furrowed trunk of an oak. Yet, nervous as she was, as the teacher continued the lesson, she leaned forward, waiting to learn what came after 29. So far, all Miss Ariel had talked about was something called phonics. And the students, their mouths shaped like O's, echoed her sounds, ah, O, and oo, all of them moaning like doves. About 11 o'clock, the warm, buttery smell of baking yeast rolls and pie pastry filled the halls and seeped into the room. Kaya's stomach panged and fitted, and when the class finally formed a single file and marched into the cafeteria, her mouth was full of saliva. Copying the others, she picked up a tray, a green plastic plate, and flatware. A large window with a counter opened into the kitchen, and laid out before her was an enormous enamel pan of chicken pie crisscrossed with thick, crispy pastry, hot gravy bubbling up. A tall black woman, smiling and calling some of the kids by name, plopped a big helping of pie on her plate, and then some pink lady peas and butter and a yeast roll. She got banana pudding and her own small red and white carton of milk to put on her tray. She turned into the seating area, where most of the tables were full of kids laughing and talking. She recognized Chase Andrews and his friends, who had nearly knocked her off the sidewalk with their bikes, so she turned her head away and sat at the empty table. Several times in quick succession, her eyes betrayed her and glanced at the boys, the only faces she knew. But they, like everybody else, ignored her. Kaya stared at the pie full of chicken, carrots, potatoes, and little peas, golden brown pastry on top. Several girls dressed in full skirts fluffed out wide with layers of crinolines approached. One tall, skinny, and blonde, and another round with chubby cheeks. Kaya wondered how they could climb a tree or even get in a boat wearing those skirts. Certainly couldn't wade for frogs. Wouldn't even be able to see their own feet. As they neared, Kaya stared at her plate. What would she say if they sat next to her? But the girls passed her by, chirping like birds, and joined their friends at another table. For all the hunger in her stomach, she found her mouth had gone dry, making it difficult to swallow. So after eating only a few bites, she drank all the milk, stuffed as much pie as she could into the milk carton, and carefully, so nobody could see her do it, wrapped it in the roll in her napkin. The rest of the day, she never opened her mouth. Even when the teacher asked her a question, she sat mute. She reckoned she was supposed to learn from them, not them from her. Why put myself up for being laughed at, she thought. At the last bell, she was told the bus would drop her 3 miles from her lane because the road was too sandy from there, and that she had to walk to the bus every morning. On the way home, as the bus swayed in deep ruts and past stretches of cord grass, a chant rose from the front. Miss Catherine Danielle Clark. Tall, skinny blonde, and round, chubby cheeks, the girls at lunch called out. Where you been, marsh hen? Where's your hat, swamp rat? The bus finally stopped at an unmarked intersection of tangled tracks way back in the woods. The driver cranked the doors open, and Kaya scooted out and ran for nearly half a mile, heaving for breath, and then jogged all the way to their lane. She didn't stop at the shack, but ran full out through the palmettos to the lagoon and down the trail that led through dense, sheltering oaks to the ocean. She broke out onto the barren beach, the sea opening its wide arms, the wind tearing loose her braided hair as she stopped at the tide. She was as near to tears as she had been the whole day. Above the roar of pounding waves, Kaya called to the birds. The ocean sand bait. The ocean sang bass. The gulls sang soprano. Hello? I think the cat got in. Shrieking and crying, they circled over the marsh and above the sand as she threw pie crust and yeast rolls onto the beach. Legs hanging down, heads twisted, they landed. A few birds pecked gently between her toes, and she laughed from the tickling until tears streamed down her cheeks. And finally, great, ragged sobs erupted from that tight place below her throat. When the carton was empty, she didn't think she could stand the pain, so afraid they would leave her like everybody else. But the gulls squatted on the beach around her and went about their business of preening their gray, extended wings. So she sat down too, and wished that she could gather them up and take them with her to the porch to sleep. She imagined them all packed in her bed, a fluffy bunch of warm, feathered bodies under the covers together. 2 days later, she heard the Ford Crestliner churning in the sand and ran into the marsh. It's raining. Ran into the marsh, stepping heavily across sandbars, leaving footprints as plain as day, and then tiptoeing into the water, leaving no tracks, doubling back and taking off in a different direction. When she got to the mud, she ran in circles, creating a confusion of clues. Then, when she reached hard ground, she whispered across it, jumping from grass clump to grass clump, leaving no trace. They came every 2 or 3 days for a few more weeks, the man in the fedora doing the search and chase, but he never even got close. Then one week, no one came. There was only the cawing of crows. She dropped her hands to her sides, staring at the empty lane. Kaya never went back to school a day in her life. She returned to heron watching and shell collecting, where she reckoned she could learn something. I already coo like a dove, she told herself, and lots better than them, even with all them fine shoes.